Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, welcome back to a new video. So since my last video, 24 hours in London, I've had a few people asking me how I did the hyperlapses in that video. That's what this video is going to be about. I'm going to talk to you about how I actually did those hyperlapses. So throughout the video, I had basically three types of hyperlapses. The first one was going from side to side around a single point in the frame. Secondly was going forward towards a single point in the frame. And the third one was moving forwards, but not necessarily towards a specific point in the frame, just generally moving forward through some crowds. So to begin with, I'll talk about the first two, which is going from side to side and also going forward towards a single point. And for that, I did them handheld, which meant all I used was a camera and a wide angle lens. I used a 17-28, and for every single hyperlapse, I was on the wide end at 17mm. The reason I choose to go as wide as possible is just because the wider you go, the more movement that you accentuate when you actually do go forward or from side to side, so you see more of that parallax. If you go with a tighter lens, you're not going to see as much movement. Another pro of doing that as well is when you bring it into post to stabilize, it will be a lot more forgiving with stabilization than if you use, for instance, a 50mm lens. So actually, probably the most difficult part of actually doing these hyperlapses is just the preparation just before it. The shooting of it is actually not that complicated at all. So it's the actual preparation before the hyperlapse that you want to focus on. So I actually have a kind of mental checklist of 5 things that I always try to remember before I shoot every hyperlapse. If you're new to this, you might want to write them down and keep it with you, but I've sort of got into the rhythm of remembering what they are. So what I do is I switch my camera over to M mode, which means that I'm using all manual settings. I always make sure that I'm in manual focus. So what I do is I line up my first photo, I half press the shutter button to make sure that I've got my subject in focus, and then from then I switch over to manual focus, which means from then on I'll be using manual focus throughout the whole hyperlapse. Also with that, I also make sure that all my exposure is manually done, so ISO, aperture and shutter speed, I make sure that I dial all those in manually. So for this particular hyperlapse that I shot, these were the settings that I used. So if you did want to use that as a rough guideline for shooting a hyperlapse outside, you can do. And also make sure you're dialing in your white balance manually, because if you choose auto, it could fluctuate a lot as well, depending on whether the sun is coming in and out. Number 3, make sure that single shooting mode is on and you're not taking multiple shots every time you click the shutter. That's very important because you just want to be taking one photo at a time. Number 4, make sure you check your pathway to make sure that you've got a clean path throughout the hyperlapse and there's no roads that are going to get in the way or any obstacles that could possibly get in your way, because you don't want to be going through that hyperlapse process for 5-10 minutes and then something obstruct you. And number 5, make sure you turn on your grid lines inside your camera. So when it comes to actually shooting the hyperlapse handheld, you want to line up your photos with a single point that's visible throughout the entirety of your hyperlapse. So for example, this frame here, I had a point on my grid lined up with a middle point on the building itself, and I made sure for every picture that that grid line and that point in the frame lined up for every picture from then on. As well as that, I also had my horizontal balance indicator on and made sure that for every picture it was always level and green. So with that, with the point lined up and the horizontal balance indicator level throughout the whole time, it will near enough ensure that when you come into post stabilization that you most likely won't have any issues. So once I took that first photo, I then took a step to the side, made sure that I lined up my points, the horizontal balance indicator was level again, took another photo. Also made sure that I was taking the exact same distance steps between each photo, and I was taking about 7 or 8 photos every minute, I think, which was about a photo every 8 seconds or so, 7 or 8 seconds I think. So yeah, I just repeated that process all the way throughout the hyperlapse, and then once I had all my photos, I could start to process them in After Effects, and that's what I'll show you now. Okay, so once you're in After Effects, just go to File, Import, File, and then you want to just find where your photos are. Click the first photo, make sure that camera raw sequence is selected, and then click import. So the first thing that will bring up is this camera raw window, which will allow you to do any grading that you need to do or any color correction. You can do that exactly here with the first photograph on this window, but just for now, for the purpose of this tutorial, I'm just going to skip that. I'm just going to click OK. And then what you want to do is just up here in the top left project window, just drag that down, start a new composition, and go up to the composition settings. Just make sure that everything, yeah, looks fine. Fit to comp. And as you can see, once we play through, looks bloody great. Now it needs a bit of work. So all you need to do is just go over here to effects and presets, just type in warp stabilizer, drag it on to the clip, and then probably don't want to go at 50% because that will just warp it too much, make it look a bit too unrealistic, unnatural. So I always just try 20% to start with, go down to the advanced tab, detailed analysis, let it just play through. It might take a little bit time. There's 126 pictures, raw pictures, which are quite high resolution, so this could take a little while. And there we go. Once that's done, as you can see in the top left, it's auto scaled in to about 106.5%, which is fine. That's not that much at all. 20%, and as you play through, it's done a great job in just smoothing out that motion and making sure that the clip rotates around the point that we selected in the when we were taking photos. And that is as simple as that, really. If you've done the process correctly of taking the pictures and making sure that that point stays in roughly the right position throughout the whole process, then you'll get a nice smooth hyperlapse like so. Then the only thing you need to do is just go up here to File, Export, Add to Render Queue. Come down here to Lossless, where you can just fix the settings. So you want to go to, I use QuickTime, Format Options, and if you just do non-uncompressed 8-bit, because it was filmed in 8-bit, and it will just make sure that it's just not a compressed file when we render it out. Everything else there is fine as default. Okay, and then just come here to find an place where you can save it, and then once you've saved it, just click render, and then once it's rendered, you can bring it back into your Premiere Pro sequence. So for the third type of hyperlapse that I did in my video, it was just generally moving forward, not necessarily using any points in the frame to line up. It was just generally moving forward, and usually within a crowd or in the middle of a road. So for these ones, to get the result that I did, I was actually using, as well as the camera and the lens, I was actually using a gimbal and intervalometer. The intervalometer is optional if you've got an app on your camera that allows you to take photos without actually having to click the shutter, then use that as well. But I'm just used to using the intervalometer, so that's what I used in this video. So for these hyperlapses, I was simply just setting my intervalometer to take photos every 1 second. The reason I was choosing 1 second apart photos was generally I was doing these hyperlapses in crowded areas or in the middle of a road where there's a lot of fast moving subjects going past. So having it every 1 second made more sense rather than doing every 5 or 6 seconds. So again, also had all manual settings like I did previously mentioned with the handheld hyperlapses. I also use generally a slower shutter speed on these ones just because I didn't have my hands on the camera. I had my hands on the gimbal itself, which allowed me to do like a 1/6 of a second or slower shutter speed, just so that I could get more motion blur of people walking past or the cars driving past as well. So once that was all set up with the camera, I made sure my gimbal was in lock mode, which meant that it would not go from side to side and it would just purely stay forward facing. I found the path that I wanted to go, which was generally either going straight down the middle of a road or straight over a bridge, somewhere where I had a nice even symmetry. And then I had the gimbal placed in a nice comfortable position tucked into my waist and my arms tucked into my side, just so that I could move forward facing and also not have the gimbal going up and down too much. Just made sure I wanted to make sure that I wanted to keep it in the same position throughout. That just means that when you do bring the photos back into post, you won't get too much bounce going on with your photos. You'll just have a nice smooth, hopefully a nice smooth hyperlapse going forward. And to be honest, that's pretty much all I had to do for that. It was just the pictures were being taken. All I had to do was make sure that I was just walking forward slowly with my arms tucked into my side. And the only problematic and difficult part about it was just making sure that I didn't move out of the direction I had to due to unforeseen circumstances like people stopping in front of me. That it's just something where if it did happen, I would just have to start the hyperlapse again, unless I would shout to them like, get fucking way. I had expensive gear with me, so I didn't want to start fighting people in the middle of the bridge. But yeah, basically that was the hardest thing for me, was just making sure that I just kind of, a lot of times I just kind of made eye contact with people just to make sure that, you know, they saw me and they kind of understood that, you know, I couldn't really move from the position that I was. So it's like a slight awkward moment, but then once they realized, it generally would kind of get out of the way, or the people that were behind me would like walk around me. So yeah, I did look like a bit of a tool, but got a decent shot out at the end of it, so that's the main thing. And then yeah, with regards to post-production on these particular hyperlapses, I didn't really have to do anything most of the time. If I had shot it well enough, I could just put these photos straight into After Effects like I did before, and I wouldn't have to use any post-stabilization. If I did, it would just be very light, like 5 or 10%, but because it's on a gimbal, generally it worked out fine. And most, like I say, most of the hyperlapses that I did using this method, I didn't actually have to use any warp stabilizer, which is great. So that's it, guys. That was my method on how I made those hyperlapses that you saw in the previous video, 24 hours in London. If you haven't seen that, go check it out. Why not? There's a link down in the description to that, and also up here. Leave a like on the video if you did find it useful in any way, and maybe subscribe if you want to see this kind of stuff in the future. Thanks very much for watching again, and have a great rest of your day, rest of your week, whatever it is, and I'll see you next time in the next video. Take care.